Spirit led, what's up?
Hey Jay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
So I got a quick question about the relationship roles between men and women in a marriage, and kind of how would you explain that leadership dynamic, and how should a relationship function in that circumstance?
Well, I mean, it's kind of obvious in the scriptures that, or the New Testament, right, that men are supposed to be the leader, men are the patriarch, men have the authority, women are supposed to submit to that authority. I mean, it's pretty much clear as day. That doesn't mean that a man has the authority or the ability to be a tyrant or to be manipulative and abusive, but he does have authority in the same way that in the church, the priest has the authority. It's not the women's committee that runs the church, although many churches are run by the women committee, whatever that is. I mean, it's just, I'm not trying to be rude or dismissive, but like, what do you mean? Like, I'll say this, like, I disagree with Tim Gordon when he says that Proverbs 31 is not about a pattern for women, that it's some sort of Judaic, what did he call it? He said that Proverbs 31 is a Judaic queen. I'm trying to think how he put it. It's like the pattern of life for a Judaic queen. Why would God include that in Proverbs when that would apply to basically no one else in history? I mean, it defeats the whole purpose of the Proverbs 31. So I do not think that it's bad or wrong for a woman to have their side business, to have their side income, to do that kind of stuff, if it doesn't interfere with the first priority, which is to be a mother, to be a wife, to be, those things. That comes first. Brett Sales, I guess Jay's getting a divorce.
So
no, I'm not getting a divorce. I hope you guys are joking. So
so quick question.
He's making a joke because Sam Shamoon said that.
So what, I guess, what is the level at which a woman should say, hey, this isn't right, and kind of stand up for herself versus submitting to authority, and how does that dynamic work, I guess, is kind of what I'm
It's just like with me and a priest, right? So my priest is my authority, but that doesn't give him the license to be an abusive tyrant, right? So I submit to him within due reason. Likewise, a wife submits to her husband within due reason. There's always limitations on authority, and you can't worship authority. And I would say that probably in some of the trad circles, you even have this tendency to worship authority, because if you think about the Roman Catholics' view, right? Roman Catholics treat the papacy as the ultimate authority that must be worshipped. Well, we don't worship authority. We worship God, and there's a hierarchy of these authorities where you have spheres of authority and limitations on it, which means that they can't go outside those boundaries, or else they're violating the higher authority above them, right? So I've said this many times. So let's say my priest comes and says, the bishop and the church have decided that you must sell your properties and give the money to the church, and if you don't, we will excommunicate you. That would be them going outside the bounds of their limitations and their sphere of authority. Right.
There are some churches that actually do that, by the way.
I'm sure there are. There's thousands of cults and con men out there. So if a husband said to the wife something like, we're going to join this Buddhist sect, and you're going to do it because I tell you to, because you're my wife. Well, in that situation, the husband is going above and beyond the legitimate authority above him, which is God, and commanding something that is against divine law, right? So the woman has a duty to rebel, just like the early Christians had a duty to not worship Caesar. So when you understand limitations and spheres of authority, which I would argue that nowadays only the Orthodox Church has actually preserved this idea. It's actually abused in the tradcat world, where you have Tim Gordon saying stuff like Proverbs 31 doesn't apply today because it's about a Judaic queen and her life. It's like that. Why would that be in Proverbs? That has no relevance or use to anyone else in the history of the church. When Proverbs 31 has been read by the church, and even as Athanasius says, that's for catechumens. Okay, well, why would we be reading catechumen literature in Proverbs 31, which has no relevance to anybody except for 5 Jewish queens in history? I mean, it's just a bizarre interpretation that Tim gave to Proverbs 31, because that doesn't fit with their idea, which again is based on Augustinianism. Remember, the Augustinian view, the only purpose of sex is procreation. Augustine didn't even believe in the unitive aspect of it, which post-Vatican II popes have actually altered. They, through the theology of the body, have rejected the older Augustinian position. And they say, well, there actually is also a unitive aspect to marriage. It's not like, they have this attitude like God, like Satan is behind the pleasure principle in the sexual act. And that's why Augustine had a hard time explaining how marriage could be a sacrament when it includes necessarily some degree of sin. So every tradcat is in this weird kind of contradictory position where on the one hand, they want to have these strict legal positions based on, it's not even based on like divine revelation and tradition. It's actually based on Aristotelian philosophy of purpose. According to the Aristotelian theology of or philosophy of purpose, your sexual organs only have one purpose, which is to produce offspring. So the primary purpose of marriage has to be the production of offspring. And anything else is either tertiary or denied. Now, post John Paul II and the theology of the body, the Roman Catholics now admit, well, there's other purposes too, right? Unitive purpose, pleasure purpose, right? All those things are there now, but they didn't used to be. So the point of all that is just to say that there's not going to be an easy one-size-fits-all answer to something that's very complex that deals with life in the modern world. And just because women are raised in a modern feminist society, it's not their fault that they were told to go to college and to do all this stuff. So it's not worth berating and sort of beating them down when that's what they were raised with and that's what they were taught. Just like I was raised with and taught that I needed to go to college and get all these degrees. And I mean, I wasted all this money that I wish I'd put into Bitcoin. I didn't want to go to college initially. I thought it was a big scam and it was a joke. But I had a lot of people prompting me and advising me to go to college. And I don't blame them because that's just like the attitude that boomers had. So likewise, most girls have been raised with the idea that they're supposed to go to college and do all the slay queen stuff, even if it's not the best scenario overall for their life. And as they get older, when they're PhDs and when they're CEOs, and they realize that men don't care about that. Men don't care that you got a PhD and you're a CEO.
So Jay, just to kind of follow up on what you said.
So hold on. And to balance that out, that's the nuanced view about women. And then at the same time, though, you have in the church all of these people who are wusses and emotionally led, and they want women to teach. They want women to be priests. They want women to do everything that men do. They want women running the church through their stupid parish committees or whatever. All that stuff is cuckianity, and it even exists in the Orthodox world, unfortunately, because it's everywhere.
Yeah, that's hilarious. But so I guess my follow up to that would be, as a leader in a relationship, it's important for you to know what God deems right and wrong. So it's your responsibility to also know as well, right? As far as, because sometimes women will just say, "Oh, I feel like you're being really mean," or "I feel like you're being this way or that way," and that's not necessarily like abusing authority for a woman to just simply feel like you're being harsh, right? So I guess, how do you kind of define that, and how does that dynamic work?
This is such a vague question. Like, no, of course, a woman feeling like you were mean doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. So I don't understand what you're wanting me to answer about. Like,
well, it's because in the Bible it says don't be harsh. So I guess how does the Orthodox Church define harshness?
There's not going to be like scientific definitions and scholastic definitions for every single term when it's about applying. So it's like, Father Deacon made this point a few months ago about one of Andrew's debates on whatever. And they were trying to trap Andrew, and they said something like, what if the human race was reduced in number in an apocalypse? And I don't remember exactly, but it's something like, could polygamy be vindicated in a situation where the human race was reduced in numbers or something like that? And I don't remember how Andrew answered it, but the point of virtue ethics that even Aristotle points out is that there's not a black and white, like, set response or answer to every single situation. That's why the scriptures lay out what are called case laws, or patterns of law based on a case. And because life is complex and complicated, there's not an easy, simple answer to every single problem. But a lot of spurgs, I'm not talking about you, but a lot of simple-minded young people, they think that the Bible is a rule book where I can go and find, and they do the same thing with canon law. I scroll through and I compile together in a bunch of quote mines all the answers that are black and white for every possible difficulty or scenario in life, right? And then they assume that you just have an easy answer. That's not how law works. It's not how it works in the secular world. It's not how it works in biblical law. There's no black and white easy answers. There's not going to be the saint who defines dogmatically for you what counts as being harsh to your wife. It's just a lived experience. The whole point of what FDA's answer was to the dilemma that they posed to Andrew on whatever, like a year ago, was that it's not a black and white. There's not an actual easy black-white answer to that, because in some situations, the only answer to a moral dilemma is the wisdom that a virtuous man can apply to the situation, you see. And that's what you see, for example, with Solomon. When Solomon is presented with the two prostitutes fighting over the baby, does Solomon have a case law that tells him the black and white answer? Here is what you do when you have two prostitutes fighting over a baby. Oh, here's the Mosaic. That's the Talmudic idea, that you can have like an actual answer to every single possible problem, right? It's silly. So you need wise men with discernment, like Solomon was a wise man, who applied the principles of the law to the scenario to say, we will chop the creature in half, and half goes to one hoe and half goes to the other hoe. And that was the means by which Solomon was able to demonstrate who the real mom was, because the real mom would be willing to give up her child and to lose it. See, so there's no case law that tells you how to handle chopping up horror babes in disputes. You see?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, Jay. I yield my questions for now. Thanks so much for your time.
Mm-hmm.